The film confirmed our worst fears about what was living in the closet and what was hiding under the bed.
They're here.
In the summer of 1982, the horror flick Poltergeist became the ultimate fright fest. But the real terror was behind the scenes.
He was white as a ghost, and we just were, like, Brian, it's going to be okay.
In the next 2 hours, we'll explore the tales and myths surrounding the Poltergeist films and expose a reality that is stranger than fiction.
He felt that there was some alien spirits that were upset, and he detected it in the skeletons.
And I began to get very creeped out about this. Is somebody trying to send me a message that I shouldn't be doing this film?
We'll unveil the strange and bizarre events that happened on the set.
He came to me sweating, very uncomfortable, and he said, "This set needs an exorcism."
Finally, we'll reveal how the filmmakers coped with tragedy.
One of the worst moments of my life, carrying a box with that beautiful little girl in it.
Some say the casts and crews of the Poltergeist movies were simply unlucky, but others believe the movies were hexed. This is the story of the Curse of Poltergeist, the true Hollywood story.
It was a positive dream of being one of the world's
Her life's ambition was to be a star.
Never recovered from the public scandal.
Hollywood has enjoyed a long love affair with horror movies, mysteries, and ghoulish tales. But sometimes what happens behind the scenes is more bizarre than anything Hollywood dreams up. No one knows that better than the casts and crews of the hit Poltergeist films. The freak accidents, untimely deaths, and acts of violence that occurred off-camera led to speculation that the movies are somehow cursed. Some dismiss the curse of Poltergeist as an urban myth. Many don't. You be the judge. The movie Poltergeist was the brainchild of Steven Spielberg. In 1982, the 35-year-old director was already a major force in Hollywood. His resume included blockbusters like Jaws and Close Encounters of the Third Kind. Spielberg was fascinated with all things frightening. Even as a kid growing up in suburban Scottsdale, Arizona, Steven enjoyed terrorizing his 3 younger sisters.
It seems like Steven's always been trying to scare us. It started probably, I can recall, when I was about in 2nd grade. My little sister and I were sharing a room, and I had a new blackboard, and he came in and drew a skull face with big scary eyes and bloodshot eyes in chalk on my blackboard. And he said, "Which one of you can sleep with this image without telling Mom?" And so this thing's staring at us, and the two of us, neither one of us wanted to chicken out, and finally we both said, "Go!" And we ran out of bed and got my mom, and she erased it.
As Steven became older, his pranks became more diabolical.
He used to do some pretty incredible things, such as he created a monster out of an old skull he had, and he dripped red wax over it and put weird flashlights and gels shining on it. And then he threw us one at a time in the closet, making us wear special sunglasses to help the effect. And then he locked the closet door and wait for our screams.
Spielberg learned an important lesson. His victims loved to be scared.
We'd sit in our rooms going, "What's he gonna do now?" And part of us just couldn't wait, like, oh, there's something fun's gonna happen. But at the same time, as a kid, I had butterflies.
It wasn't long before Spielberg combined his love of horror with his other passion, making movies.
Oh, he's always filming everything. He would take my Barbie dolls and he'd put on music from Spartacus, and he'd walk, like the Death March, he'd walk Barbie up to the scaffold and film her hanging, So he did very macabre things with our toys, but we all thought this was normal, Growing up, we all thought everybody did this in their houses. I guess that wasn't the case.
By the spring of 1980, Spielberg was in the middle of filming his next movie, Raiders of the Lost Ark. That summer, the director became obsessed with an idea for the ultimate haunted house movie. E-Online film critic Andy Jones.
Setting the film in a suburban location sort of intensifies the scare factor, because you know what? Most horror movies and scary haunted house movies, they're set like, in spooky castles you shouldn't be going into anyway. Don't go in that building. You know, these are the buildings that you want to stay away from. But, a neighborhood like in the suburbs where every building's beige and the kids all look the same and, everyone goes to the same PTA meeting and the high school's right down the block, that's not the place where you expect to find, ghosts and scary things. You feel very safe in these communities. And I think that's exactly where Spielberg kind of got us.
While finishing Raiders of the Lost Ark, Spielberg knocked out an outline for Poltergeist, a story about an ordinary suburban family terrorized by ghosts. Spielberg and Raiders producer Frank Marshall took the project to MGM and sold it on the spot. There was one problem. Spielberg was committed to direct another project.
When Spielberg signed on for Poltergeist with MGM, he was already under contract with Universal on E.T., which sort of forbade him to direct another movie, specifically Poltergeist. Obviously, Universal didn't want to have these two movies competing.
Spielberg wasn't thrilled, but he found a solution. Steven's deal at Universal didn't prevent him from producing Poltergeist. Named directors clamored for the job, but Spielberg picked 37-year-old Tobe Hooper, whose 1974 low-budget shocker, The Texas Chainsaw Massacre, was considered a horror classic. Spielberg had his director, but he still needed a script. In 1980, Steven met with two up-and-coming screenwriters, Mark Victor and Michael Grace. The director actually had the duo in mind for another project.
We were at his house and he was showing us a guy named Joe, which later became a movie, and wanted to know if we wanted to write that. And then we were talking about ghost stories, I think, during the night and Twilight Zones.
When Spielberg revealed he was developing his own ghost story, the writers wanted in.
Steven had some notes for an idea. When Michael and I walked outside, we both kind of looked at each other and said, I'd rather do the ghost story. So we called Steven and said, hey, that ghost story, we'd rather do the ghost story.
We didn't know that calling Steven and telling him that we didn't want to do one movie and we wanted to do a different one was not something that most people don't usually do. We hadn't been in the business that long.
But Spielberg liked their moxie. Grace and Victor got the job. The director demanded realism.
As Steven had us meeting with psychics and ghost hunters and all kinds of the most bizarre people we'd ever imagined. There was some guy up in the hills who we met with who supposedly could see ghosts, and we were wandering around some old mansion, and he goes, see, there's one there. And we'd look up, and there would be nothing there. We go, oh yeah.
For true inspiration, Spielberg and his writers reached back to their own childhood fears.
We just thought about everything that scared us as kids, nightmares, fantasies, dreams, whatever. And we all contributed stories about, the usual things kids are afraid of, the dark closet, the what's under the bed.
Steven was afraid of a lot of things, and he was really, really frightened of clowns, and not only clowns, but trees. Steven was very much afraid of a particular tree that grew in our backyard, and this tree, when it would storm or there'd be wind, would scratch on his window, and he was just deathly afraid of this tree. And in Poltergeist, there's an incredible image of the tree coming and grabbing the little boy, and when I saw that, I just went, oh my gosh, he captured the fear that he had and really put it into the film.
But the writers wanted to go way beyond clowns and scary trees.
We had a lunch with Steven, and we sat him down. We said, Steven, in order for this to really have impact
and be different,
a lot of people have to die. He goes, how many? We said, the whole family.
We said, we want to kill the whole family. And he stopped and he said, at the end of the meeting, it was a nice compromise. He said, only one. And we looked at each other and went, the little girl. Obviously, it was the beginning of the process.
Victor and Grace later changed their minds about killing the little girl. They turned in their completed script in the fall of 1980. Steven Spielberg and director Tobe Hooper needed to find a group of actors who looked like no harm could ever come to them. Your typical next-door neighbors. The first call went to 32-year-old JoBeth Williams. The actress was best known for her role in the 1979 Academy Award-winning film Kramer vs. Kramer.
My agent called me and said, we're sending you a script called Poltergeist. And I went, oh, a horror movie? No, I'm not interested, in my snobby little way. And then they said, well, Steven Spielberg is producing this. And I went, oh, well, then I guess I'll read it.
The actress loved the script and signed on to play the role of a housewife terrorized by ghosts. Williams was already a believer in the supernatural.
I was doing summer stock in New Hampshire, and a bunch of the actors were living in this boarding house. And I had a dream, or what I thought was a dream one night, that the bed was shaking. And I thought, well, maybe we're having an earthquake. And I woke up in the morning and I went down to breakfast, and the lady who owned the house, you know, serving breakfast, and I said, wow, I had the weirdest dream. I thought we were having an earthquake because the bed was shaking. She said, oh, no, dear, that's just our ghost. And I went, ghost? She said, oh, yes, it's been here for years, nothing to worry about.
JoBeth had an actor in mind to play her husband, 35-year-old Craig T. Nelson.
JoBeth and I had worked in Stir Crazy, and then she got a part in the Poltergeist, first one, and she, I think, suggested me to Steven Spielberg. Then I came in and read for it and auditioned for it and got it.
To play the film's mysterious exorcist, Spielberg looked for someone more unconventional. 45-year-old Zelda Rubinstein auditioned for the part. Like JoBeth Williams, Zelda had first-hand experience with the unknown.
I had been living in London for a very long time, and one night I was having a dream, like a little cartoon image of my dog back in California, and said, I have to go now, I'm so tired. But I had to say goodbye, and he went out the right side of my vision, and I woke up immediately screaming because I knew my dog had died. And in just a couple hours, my mother called from California to say the dog had died, very mysteriously.
Rubinstein had the goods. She won the role. 21-year-old Dominique Dunn and 7-year-old Oliver Robbins signed on to play two of the family's children. But Spielberg and Hooper still needed to find Carol Ann, the youngest child and the poltergeist's special victim. The film promised to be a monster hit, but little did the filmmakers know there were monstrous surprises right around the corner. Coming up, life imitates art.
I was like, oh my God, I don't know if I can take months of this.
And later,
he delivered the line the way he did because he knew that he was going to die.
in the spring of 1981, producer Steven Spielberg was ready to shoot his movie Poltergeist. He had his script, director, and most of his cast. But Spielberg still hadn't found the right child to play the ghost's innocent target. Spielberg searched far and wide for his Carol Ann. One of the actresses he considered was 6-year-old Drew Barrymore.
I remember that so vividly. I met with Steven. I originally went in for Poltergeist, actually. And he took one look at me and said, "You're wrong for that movie." And I was sort of like, oh, God, I'm in the wrong place. And he was like, "But I think you're right for this other movie."
That other movie was E.T. Spielberg kept looking for the ideal girl for Poltergeist and found her in an unlikely place. Agent Bob Preston represented 5-year-old Heather O'Rourke.
Heather's older sister, Tammy, was working on a feature film at the MGM lot called Pennies from Heaven. In the MGM commissary, Kathy O'Rourke, Heather's mother, asked Heather to sit down and save the seats for them. So while Heather is sitting there by herself, this stranger came up, glasses, beard, sort of long hair, and said, "Hi, what's your name?" And she said, "Well, my name is Heather O'Rourke, but you're a stranger and I can't talk to you." And he said, "Well, do you mind if I sit here until your mother comes back?" And she said, "Well, she didn't say anything about that, but yes, you can sit down until she comes, but that's her seat." Okay, fine. So this man sat down, talked to Heather while they were waiting for the food to come. Sure enough, Mom comes back with a tray full of food and the sister. The man gets up and said, "I'd like to introduce myself. My name is Steven Spielberg." At that point, Mom drops the tray on the table, everything spills.
Steven asked how old she was. She said, "Well, I'm 5. He said, "Well, I need someone that's 6. She said, "Okay, just proceed to eat her sandwich." And then a day or so later, he came up and says, in the commissary again, he said, "How are you again, Heather?" Next thing we know, we were given a card to be interviewed.
They met with Heather by herself, and Mr. Spielberg said, "Would you mind taking the script outside and have your mom sort of read the lines to you, and hopefully you can memorize it?" And Heather said, "I can read." And he goes, "Well, sure," and just sort of joking along with her. She goes, "No, really." She picked up the script and started reading it.
They related back and forth, and she screamed and cried and followed his directions. She said, "Could you go home now?" She was done screaming. He said, "You sure could." And next thing we know, she had the job.
Filming began in May 1981 in Simi Valley, California, a quiet suburb 40 miles north of Los Angeles. No one anticipated any major problems, but right from the start, production was grueling. Actor James Karen.
It was a very hot day, a new crew, and it was a rough day's shoot for a first day. It would be rough for any day.
Even the neighbors were exhausted. George Rakowski lived across the street from the Poltergeist house.
The main complaint of most of the neighbors was that the shooting was going on at 3 o'clock in the morning, and there were explosions and noises and sounds, and you couldn't sleep, and lights were blurring, and it was a distraction.
Things didn't get any easier for Spielberg and company when they moved into an MGM soundstage. In the summer of 1981, the Writers Guild went on strike. Mark Victor and Michael Grace went with them.
We were ordered by our guild to be picketing while the movie was shooting inside. It was a very strange situation for us.
We were outside of MGM picketing our movie that was being shot inside Poltergeist, and someone came out and found us, said, "Come on, we'll sneak you in the back door." So they came out and got us and brought us in the back door so that we could go to the set and spend a few hours on the set and see what was going on. And we were escorted back out to the picket line and continued our protest.
Steven Spielberg was on set every day, but he couldn't give Poltergeist his undivided attention.
He was also making E.T. and getting ready to do E.T. It was in pre-production, and I can remember him talking about it and how maybe it was going to be a pretty big film, something he was excited about.
Despite the chaos, the cast seemed unaffected, at least for the moment.
Oh, Dominique was just a delightful young woman. I mean, Dominique was 21, I think, playing 16, full of life, full of energy. You know, a lot of jokes about her playing a teenager when she was really a young woman.
Ollie. He was so tiny. I mean, he's just a little guy, and he was fun. He was pro and ready to go to work.
Unlike her character, Heather O'Rourke wasn't fazed by the movie's eerie plot.
If I cried in a scene, she would cry. If I seemed scared in a scene, she would totally take her cue off me and she would become scared. To the point where I began to get worried, and I said, "Heather, I'm just acting." She said, "I know, so am I." And I went, "Oh, okay." I'll just back off.
For the children, the movie was fun and make-believe. But for JoBeth Williams and Craig T. Nelson, it was a different story.
It was physically very hard. Just a lot of running and screaming and dirt being thrown at us and skeletons being thrown at us. And I was like, oh my God, I don't know if I can take months of this.
You just seemed like you were consistently wet and cold all the time. That's what I remember, is being difficult. Or covered in gel, which was the afterbirth of something.
Whatever it was, it had a lot of alcohol in it, and so it made your body very cold. And, little Heather and I had to be covered in this for long hours while we were shooting in the bathtub. It was pretty uncomfortable.
But not nearly as uncomfortable as one of the film's elaborate sets, a rotating bedroom.
I was really scared about getting on that ride. Because I'd never done anything few people have done anything like that. And, the way it worked was that the cameraman was strapped, he and the camera were strapped to the set so that they rotated. And basically, I stayed in place, but I had to slide with the set. And we did it over and over and over again. And the people who had built the set had so faithfully recreated the bedroom set that they had even recreated the cottage cheese ceiling, which scraped and scratched me every time I went around. So after about the 20th take, I had sort of scrapes and some blood on my elbows and my knees, which were exposed because of what I was wearing. And I remember I got off and I said, you know, Stephen, I'm bleeding. And he said, it's okay, we can wipe it away, it'll never show. And I said, well, I really appreciate your sympathy.
As life on set became more difficult, life at home became more bizarre.
Dominique had a weird experience while she was making the movie. You know, soon after the production started on the film, she was staying in the house. A bookshelf falls over, throws books all over the room that was bolted into the wall.
I was living in an apartment in LA because I was from New York, and I would come home every evening, and the pictures in the apartment would be crooked, and I would straighten them, and I would go to bed, and I'd get up really early and go to work the next day. And I'd come home late at night after a long, exhausting day, and the pictures would be crooked again. And I began to get very creeped out about this. I began to think, is somebody trying to send me a message that I shouldn't be doing this film, you know, that there's something wrong with me dealing with this subject?
Coming up.
The lights flickered and went on, and then all the video games in the room started playing themselves.
By June of 1981, Steven Spielberg was in the second month of shooting his horror film, Poltergeist. But a string of mysterious episodes was already pushing his cast and crew to the edge. The long days on the Poltergeist set and the disturbing incidents at home were clearly catching up with JoBeth Williams.
We were so tired because the days were so exhausting. We all began to get hypersensitive to noises, sounds, you know, jumpy lights. I'd see things sort of flash by. And I think people were more susceptible to being creeped out because of the material that we were dealing with. You know, when you sort of have to put yourself, especially as actors, in a state of terror all the time, you begin to overreact to things.
The actors constantly wondered what would happen next. Shooting the movie's last scene was a terrifying ordeal for Williams.
The muddy swimming pool was actually on a set. It was at MGM in the old Esther Williams tank. They had built the pool, and then they put these huge lights, giant lights around it to light it, and then huge, what they call Ritter fans that are like 16 feet across to blow and create the sort of wind in the atmosphere. And I've always been very sort of, one of my fears is electricity and water. And so I would see these huge fans and these huge lights, and it would make me very scared to get into the water, because I thought, well, what if one fell in? Somebody bumped into it accidentally, because there's, you know, a million crew members around.
But producer Steven Spielberg didn't let his leading lady down.
Steven Spielberg put on waders and waded into the pool and stood, you know, out of camera range on the side in the water. And he said, I want you to know that if a light falls in and it's going to electrocute you, it'll electrocute me too. And I felt much better. And fortunately, neither of us fried.
Cast members weren't the only ones dealing with stress. Director Tobe Hooper had his own issues.
My recollections of Tobe was that I believe he had a vision as director slightly different from that of Steven Spielberg as producer, and very frequently Steven made adjustments to the shots that Tobe set up.
I'm sure it was hard for Tobe at times, because Steven is very strong. He's a very strong personality. His knowledge is just sort of breathtaking. And he was there all the time. I think you could really feel that Steven was very actively involved. And I'm sure sometimes that, that was frustrating.
It was also frustrating for the rest of the crew. Special effects makeup artist Craig Reardon was in charge of creating a ghostly piece of meat.
In the script, the steak became cancerous. That's the actual word that was used. And so Toby saw that as something that had been deformed with tumors. So, because that's the way he saw it, I actually sculpted something, and I brought it to the set for his approval. And he liked it, he approved it. Steven Spielberg walked up and said, "What's that?" And I said, "That's the steak." And he said, "No, I don't think so." And he said, I think we better keep it looking like a steak, otherwise the audience will get lost." And I could see his logic, but I thought, a lot of work just went into this, which is now ash can. So from that point on, I made certain that everything got run through Steven Spielberg.
Spielberg's influence was palpable.
There's a scene where a man is hallucinating that his face is dissolving, and that was vintage Steve. He'd come in to tell us a bedtime story. He'd first take wet toilet paper, plaster it on his face, and he'd come in and this scream and these claws, he would just start, and ripping his skin off and throwing it towards us.
With Spielberg standing on the sidelines, Craig Reardon wasn't going to take any chances.
It was necessary for a pair of hands to come up and actually tear into this face. Now, guess whose hands? Steven Spielberg. And the reason for that was very simple. I wanted him to look at it in dailies and not say, who the hell was pulling that apart? They really did a lousy job.
Spielberg's hands-on involvement fueled rumors that he had taken over Hooper's directing duties. But cast members insist this was not the case.
I saw Toby there every day, and I saw Spielberg there every day. And on any picture, the producer talks to you, and the director talks to you. I didn't think anything odd about it, about the arrangement.
I mean, Toby certainly had his fair share of input, too. We're clear that we were working with both of these people. It didn't affect me. I was happy to have both of them around. So, if there were resentments, they were kept away from me.
In August 1981, Tobe Hooper called cut for the last time. The cast left the set exhausted and happy to put the project behind them. But there was more drama. MGM executives hired author James Caan to write a Poltergeist novel as a promotional tool for the release of the movie.
I didn't have an office per se, but Steven's office on the then MGM lot was open because he was, that's where he was filming E.T. So I just ensconced myself in his office for that month and wrote 15, 18 hours a day to get the book done. So by the end of the month, it was the day after Thanksgiving, I was getting close to the end. Marcy, the typist, came in late that afternoon, and we were writing into the night, and it was about 9 or 10 o'clock at night, and I was just writing the line, "Thunder and lightning ripped the sky." And just as I finished writing it, this intense blast of lightning and huge thunderclap just whammed into the building. The facing on the air conditioning unit blew off the unit, flew across the room and hit me in the back, and all the lights flickered and went out. And Marcy jumped up and screamed, and we didn't know what was going on. After about half a minute or a minute, the lights flickered and went on, and then all the video games in the room started playing themselves.
Meanwhile, Spielberg was up against another kind of scary force, the Motion Picture Association of America. The ratings board was concerned about the movie's graphic violence.
The first rating for Poltergeist was an R, which was the kiss of death back in the 80s. Steven Spielberg and Frank Marshall knows where their money comes from during the summer blockbuster season, and that's from young kids who are willing to go to see movies over and over and over again. MGM really needed to have a PG rating.
Spielberg and MGM executives weren't about to give in.
There's no nudity in it. There's no horrific language. Even the violence that happened is, it's scary, but it's not. But it's tame. So Frank Marshall and Steven pleaded with the ratings board to get a PG.
The producers got their wish, and Poltergeist was rated PG. But Spielberg's problems were far from over. In April 1982, the trailer for Poltergeist hit movie theaters all over the country. The ad campaign promoted the film as a Steven Spielberg production. director Tobe Hooper was furious.
Because of this ensuing controversy over who really directed the film, obviously Tobe felt, a little short-shrifted.
Spielberg responded with a full-page ad in Daily Variety, complimenting Hooper's work as the director of the project. But audiences didn't care who directed Poltergeist. The movie opened on June 4th, 1982, and the weekend box office take was almost $7 million. The reviews were equally impressive. 6-year-old Heather O'Rourke was thrilled.
And she predicted even then, she goes, Preston, this is going to be a huge hit. How are we ever going to top it?
Coming up.
Sweeney beat the crap out of her. She thought she was gonna die.
On June 4th, 1982, the film Poltergeist released its terror on audiences nationwide. That weekend, Steven Spielberg's ghost story ruled at the box office, but the movie's success would soon be overshadowed by tragedy and violence. Poltergeist turned Heather O'Rourke into a celebrity.
With the popularity of Poltergeist, there was nowhere that Heather could go or not go where she would not be recognized.
Well, one thing Heather told me, she says, I don't know why people want my autograph. It's just my name I'm writing. So she just, and I explained to her, well, she was in love with, she liked Sylvester Stallone. So I said, well, if you got someone's autograph you really like, was that important? She said, oh, yes. I said, well, that's how you were to other kids. So she never refused an autograph, and she could understand all that. She was never rude or anything, but she didn't think she was anything special.
The movie hit home with audiences.
The strangest people were the people after the movies who kept saying, well, that happened to me.
What happened in the movie happened to me. Really thank you for portraying it so accurately.
They recognized me in the street. They stopped me in the aisles of the supermarket and said, could you please take a look at my house? No, ma'am, I can't. I'm so sorry.
Poltergeist seemed on track to be the summer's biggest hit until Spielberg's other movie, E.T., was released 1 week later. The picture shattered box office records and put Poltergeist in its place.
E.T. just kind of trumped it, but it trumped everything in its path. E.T. was one of those, spectacular blockbusters for the ages.
Although Poltergeist was no longer #1 at the box office, the movie put its young stars on the map. The career of 22-year-old Dominique Dunne was taking off. She was set to appear in the upcoming TV series, V.
She was really brilliant, smart, talented, easy to get along with, full of enthusiasm because she was just starting her career.
Dominique's love life was also moving full steam ahead. Her boyfriend, 26-year-old John Sweeney, was a successful chef. The couple appeared happy, but they were dealing with demons of their own. Michael Feig worked with Sweeney at Ma Maison restaurant in West Hollywood.
First impression of John was high energy. He was always moving. Bit of a temper, and they didn't really want to set it off or aggravate him or anything.
Sweeney had a short fuse. When a fan complimented Dominique on her performance in Poltergeist, Sweeney reportedly attacked him. Just a few months later, Dominique became the victim of one of Sweeney's jealous rages. Dominique's friend, actor Miguel Ferrer.
Sweeney beat the crap out of her. She thought she was gonna die. He choked her unconscious, banged her head on the floor, did all this. I was absolutely blown away.
1 month later, Dominique and Sweeney fought again. This time, the young actress took action. Friend, Gloria Gifford.
He tried to hurt her, and she knew he was really doing something bad. And it was after that she told me that she said she was separating from him, that they were going to take a time away from each other.
But Sweeney didn't take no for an answer. According to police reports, on the night before Halloween, the chef carved a chocolate mask in Dominique's likeness and delivered it to her door. Dominique was rehearsing lines with actor David Packer when Sweeney made his surprise visit. Former LAPD detective Harold Johnston.
John Sweeney came up, knocked on the door, asked her to let him in so he could talk to her. She declined. She then came outside with him to talk to him. Mr. Packer said he then heard loud noises and loud conversation coming from the front porch.
Packer later testified that he tried to ignore the argument. He turned on the Poltergeist soundtrack to drown out the noise. Then he heard Dominique scream.
At that time, Mr. Packer said he went to the telephoned a friend, and he left a message on the answering machine and said, "If I die tonight, John Sweeney did it."
In a panic, Packer phoned the police.
Police personnel who answered the telephone told him that if he was any kind of a man, that he would go out and help Miss Dunn.
But Packer didn't go outside. A few steps away, Dominique was fighting for her life. Prosecuting attorney Stephen Barshop.
Sweeney grabbed Dominique Dunn by the neck. He grabbed her, pulled her off the porch, pulled her to the side of the house, and was strangling her.
It took approximately 4 minutes. When the sheriff's deputies first arrived, Mr. Sweeney walked out to them with his hands up. He then walked back here and lay down beside Miss Dunn.
Dominique was rushed to Cedars-Sinai Hospital in Los Angeles, where she slipped into a coma.
Our emotions would swing from absolute despair to, come on, she's still here. As long as she's still here, there's still a chance it's going to be okay.
But it wasn't going to be okay. After 4 days, Dominique Dunn was taken off life support and declared officially dead. Family and friends were devastated.
She was a wonderful up-and-coming young star. And, you know, when she was killed, we were stunned. We were just stunned because that had been such a life force. So that was really a tragedy.
John Sweeney faced murder charges. His trial began on July 19, 1983, in the Santa Monica Superior Court. Author Makita Brotman.
John Sweeney came into court looking very, very contrite. He was wearing a black suit, clutching a Bible, looking like a student in a Catholic seminary. He looked down. He was very pensive and contrite throughout the whole trial.
Sweeney testified that he strangled Dominique Dunn in the heat of passion. He put on a tearful display. On November 10, 1983, after a 6-week trial, the jury returned with its verdict. Sweeney was convicted of voluntary manslaughter and sentenced to 6 years in prison.
He served in the end 2.5 years, and that was a very controversial, for someone who strangled his girlfriend with his bare hands.
After Dominique's tragic death, an urban legend was born, the Curse of Poltergeist.
To a certain extent, there were close similarities between events in the film and events outside the film, so I think that really began to fuel the curse.
Coming up, an actor's last rites.
And I said that he needs to do this for a soul. I knew he wasn't going to live long.